right. Hello. Welcome to the Safe Passage podcast. I'm Olivia and welcome Kaila.
Hi, everyone. How are you, Olivia?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. Enjoying this finally nice weather after a weird rainy June.
I know. June was weird. It was super kind of rainy and overcast. Now it's been real nice.
Yeah, now it feels like a real summer.
Yeah. I know. I went from like working from home to working from my porch.
It's great.
I know.
I enjoy it.
Yeah. It makes it hard to see my computer screen.
Yeah.
I had to I tried to hang up a blanket to make like a sunshade.
That's so smart.
So that I could see my screen. It kind of worked.
That's a great idea. I should try that.
Yeah. And at least it kept me from getting too sunburned.
Oh, yeah.
At the very least.
That's also an added challenge to working outside.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. Again, Kaila. To anyone who's listening, you remember Kaila from our last episode. We talked about healthy teen relationships. And so we have Kaila here again to talk with us about another one of her fine expertises.
If you didn't listen to last episode, you should go listen to it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Always. You're welcome always. Just hop on every podcast.
Let's go start infiltrating all of them.
Yep. That's the secret plot. Slowly rope Kaila in.
Exactly.
So today we are talking about bystander intervention.
I'm so excited about this.
This is one of your many specialties.
I love this because it's just so I love the prevention piece. I think the awareness piece of our work is so crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that the bystander intervention piece can be a really effective solution and tool.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the happy note.
Yeah, it does. It's true. It's
don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm super excited because it's a really great tool that is easy for anybody. It doesn't have to be anyone as a specific expert in any field, but anybody can kind of benefit from bystander.
Yeah, it is. It's you don't have to be a social worker or some trained expert in gender-based violence or anything like that to benefit from bystander education, bystander training, and things like that.
Exactly. And doesn't have to be this huge Superman superhero move.
Mm-hmm.
It could be really simple, small steps.
Yeah, definitely. So do you want to share just a little bit about the work that you do around bystander intervention and some of your areas of work in this?
Yeah. So the awesome part about this bystander piece is we really try to incorporate it into our middle school and high school curriculum. So a lot of times at the end of our educational presentations, we'll include small bystander tips that people can do to prevent dating and domestic violence, stalking, sexual assault, and bullying. So this is a really great tool that we can teach middle schoolers, high schoolers, and then we do a really big, through Safe Passage, we partner with Green Dot, which is a nationally recognized curriculum and training, and we use that at Coeur d'Alene High School as a training method and at North Idaho College. So it's been really great and effective ways to get students involved in preventing these different types of interpersonal violence on campus and in their community. And we also offer it overviews to community members and organizations. So that way we can kind of see this impact as a ripple effect through our community and through our schools. And it seems to be really effective.
I love that. Fantastic. So I think we hear the word bystander, and I think it has a lot of different connotations for different people, and different programming has different definitions that they use of bystander.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes people hear bystander and they think, oh, just someone who doesn't care about anything and they just watch bad things happening, or those types of things. I think it has a different, people hear it and they think different things, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
What do we mean when we say bystander?
Yeah.
For the purposes of this podcast and just our education in general that we do.
Totally. So I think the best simplest way to put it is a bystander is someone who sees these types of interpersonal violence happening or sees behaviors that are harmful to someone or behaviors that could potentially turn into or escalate into violence or harm. And there's kind of like two different ways to look at it. Like you said, there's a lot of different connotations around bystander. And there's kind of like this passive bystander versus an active bystander. So a passive bystander would be someone who sees these things happening, but doesn't take any action to change the violent or harmful behaviors. Whereas when we talk about bystander, we're really talking about an active bystander. And an active bystander is someone who sees these things and also takes action to change or stop the behavior from happening. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I think the other thing we like to look at when we do our bystander education is we're looking at reactive actions versus proactive actions,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like I think those active bystanders, often we see them in a reactive action where they, are seeing a behavior that's harmful and then they're jumping in and taking like a direct action to stop that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like you have like a high school student and they see, one of their other classmates bullying another student and they jump in and are like, hey, cut that out. Stop doing that.
Yeah.
And kind of like directly ending that. And then we can also see things that are more proactive. So we're taking like those more preemptive actions to kind of try to keep those things from even coming up in the first place. So we're like, letting everyone in our school or our community or whatever space we're in know that those violent and those harmful behaviors are just not acceptable in that community or that space. So maybe students are like hanging up posters at school that are promoting healthy friendships or, healthy relationships or things like that, where just trying to send the message across to everyone in their community that those harmful actions aren't permitted here. We don't put up with that. So hopefully keeping those things from happening in the first place in the future.
Yeah, I love that. That's so important. It's like that proactive piece can be so crucial.
Yeah.
And that's really big goal with the green dot is we talk a lot about like reactive in terms of like you said, stepping in, and then proactive, like hopefully preventing those things from happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And I think both pieces are so important. Like it's hard to just do one and ignore the other. Like you really, really need both pieces.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a quick note for the listeners. This episode, like many episodes in this podcast, contains discussions of sexual assault and domestic violence. If these are sensitive topics for you, please take appropriate precautions. And just a reminder, Safe Passage advocates are available to talk 24/7 at 208-664-9303. So, why is it so important? What's kind of the background for this? Or like, why are we kind of talking about bystander intervention? Why is it such a crucial piece?
Yeah, I think that it's so important because it kind of has a long history. So the bystander effect was coined in 1964 by psychologists Bibb Latane and John Darley after a really horrific sexual assault and murder took place. The victim was Kitty Jennings, was tragically sexually assaulted and murdered outside of her apartment building. And the really interesting piece about this murder was that there was a lot of other neighbors and other people who are around that apartment building who heard her or saw something that was off, but nobody really stepped in. And so it kind of highlighted how if one person in this particular case and investigation had stepped place when they saw him following her down the street or heard her yell. If someone had stepped in in those moments, it's quite possible that she may have never lost her life. So that's kind of the tragic background, that kind of launched this research behind the bystander effect. So they determined from this case that when more people are present, that individuals may be slower to respond to violent or harmful acts. So again, that's what we call the bystander effect, it's also called a diffusion of responsibility. The more people involved, the less likely it is that someone is to step in. That's kind of that background piece behind it.
And that's such a sad story.
It's horrible.
I know, knowing that there were those people there who could have done something. And I think the other part of that story that's so interesting to me is, like, it wasn't that people didn't want to help. Like, it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that people thought that those actions were acceptable. Because I know, like, there was someone who tried to call the police, but, his wife stopped him and was like, "Oh, no, like, surely someone else has already called the police." Obviously, they have. They must have. And so it's not that people don't want to do something or
Mm-hmm.
don't want to step in. It's just really difficult, and it's hard to even, like, know what you're looking at, and it's hard to know, like, what the safest and best option is. And so I think that that's such an interesting part of that story too, and it's really, really, really tragic and sad.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, that is a super interesting point. Like, you make a really good point, and I think that's something that's a lot of feedback that we get from programming is, or the reason behind why people really like enjoy bystander programming is because like it is hard like to step in or like figure out what those different options are in that like instant moment in time. And so that's a great part about the programming and the trainings that we do is it gives like people an opportunity to practice those tools. So when things that seem off or are potentially harmful or violent do happen, like it's okay because we practiced this before. We do a lot of role play.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of gives you that, like, a safe spot to sort of practice and kind of feel out sort of what you can do before you're actually, like, in that really crucial moment where you have to jump in and do something right away.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think often, Kyla, when you and I talk about our work, one of the really common focuses and one of the important focuses of our work is talking about, who we can help and what we can do after
Mm-hmm.
those harmful things have happened. And, unfortunately, those harmful things are still happening. So we are still at a place where that's a very important part of our work is, getting involved in helping people out after those harmful things have happened. But I think kind of like we mentioned at the beginning of this episode, like that prevention piece is also something that we do. And I think you and I both get really excited about that. And just working to even keep that from happening in the first
Mm-hmm.
place. And so I think that this bystander education is a really, really important part of that. And it has a lot of important aspects that kind of help change some of those patterns that cause that harm happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you and I can't be everywhere at one time, like just like fighting off like all these like potentially harmful situations. And so
Yeah,
that's
I mean, I think I'm thinking about a really cool superhero movie now.
we should make a green dot superhero movie.
We should.
And then everybody turns into superheroes at the end.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's great that like other people can kind of be a part of that prevention piece too. Like it doesn't have to be just us. Everybody can prevent this eventually.
Mhm. Yeah. I think one of the other parts of it that I love so much is that it takes the blame and the focus off of that survivor or that person who experienced those harmful things. So it limits some of that victim blaming. So instead of asking, about the survivor, like, oh, like how did they let this happen to them? Like, why didn't they say something?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead, we're shifting that focus and we're saying, how can we all work together as a community to keep this from happening to anyone? How can we learn to step in and say something? What can we do to keep these things from happening? And it kind of puts that focus on us and saying, like, what can we do about this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love that piece. I love it because it also gives us an opportunity to change our social norms. So instead of, like victim blaming or questioning like people who were involved, being a part of like stepping in and preventing and being like an active bystander means that if something is not socially acceptable, it's less likely to happen. So that's the best part. It's like stepping in being an active bystander means that like your sphere of influence is directly impacted by your actions. And when your friends see you stepping in for somebody else, it really like encourages other people to maybe like take a second look and think about like other situations or similar situations that they were involved with. And it really sets a tone that like these types of things aren't acceptable in our community and everybody has to do their part.
Yeah, definitely. The responsibility for preventing abuse is often framed as a women's issue,
Mm-hmm.
but in reality, like that prevention, it's everyone is responsible, regardless of their gender or whatever. And so I think the bystander education really helps to, kind of put that responsibility on everybody
Yeah,
as well. And that is also another important piece too.
absolutely. And there's like a lot of really great stories around that responsibility being shifted onto everybody and not just like one particular like identity.
Yeah, because we look at like those really, really tragic stories, like the Kitty Genovese story that we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a lot of stories that have a lot more, maybe positive or more encouraging outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
People listening might remember in the news, there was a story about Brock Turner and a sexual assault against Chanel Miller while she was unconscious that happened in 2015. And it was in the news a lot. People may remember it as the Stanford swimmer case. It got a lot of national attention. But one piece of that story was there were two young men passing by and they saw some red flags. They kind of noticed what was happening. They saw that something didn't really feel right to them. So they kind of got a little closer. They approached Turner and they confronted him while this assault was happening. And they were like, hey, like, what are you doing? Stop that. Like, is she okay? And so he tried to flee the scene. Brock Turner tried to flee the scene, but they kind of chased him and held him down until more help arrived. And then they checked in on her to make sure that she was doing okay. And I think as tragic and sad as that story is, I think it's very encouraging to note that like if it wasn't for them,
Mm-hmm.
that assault probably would have been a lot worse. And it's also likely that Turner never would have been found out, and nothing ever would have happened. And I know in her victim impact statement that got a lot of attention, she referred to them both as heroes and kind of made it very clear that them being there and them stepping in and kind of doing something about that situation really meant a lot to her and was very encouraging to her as well as a survivor.
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite bystander stories.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's it's good. It hits you right at home and it's super encouraging and hopeful. And yeah, I just love that story. And there was another one in Missoula, Montana, which also has a large university. An anonymous person said, quote, I saw a guy trying really hard with this girl, and she looked really uncomfortable. I intervened and walked up to her and acted like she was one of my good friends I haven't seen in a while, and she went along with it. We walked away to the dance floor, and she thanked me, end quote. So I think that's also a really great example of like how simple it is to step in and how it can really drastically change the course of a situation like happening. So those are some really great bystander stories that illustrate why it's so important.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts of doing the bystander education in the schools is listening to students' bystander
Oh,
stories
yeah.
of times when either they stepped in or maybe they were in a situation where they were uncomfortable or felt unsafe and someone else stepped in. I love listening to those stories, and there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those stories fill my soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make me so happy and so proud of our kids and like so hopeful for like the next generation
Mm-hmm.
and their future. And hopefully like their future, like with each generation, their futures will be more and more safe because this will slowly become more of a normative.
Oh, yeah. It's super encouraging. That being said, it's not easy to be a bystander as much as like there are a lot of little tips and like, jumping in and like acting like you're really good friends with someone who seems like they're maybe uncomfortable. And those are really great tips and make it a lot easier, but it's still not easy.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about reasons why it can be really, really difficult and like very valid reasons why it can be difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone has barriers essentially. Like, and that's what those barriers are things that prevent people from stepping in. And like you said, like everyone has them. It's totally normal. They can make things difficult. So we can go over a few of those barriers. There's three of them. There are personal barriers, there's relationship or social barriers, and lastly, there's general barriers. So with personal barriers, it's kind of a lot of times it's related to like personality, like someone's really introverted or shy, that can be a barrier, or maybe they don't want to be embarrassed or feel like they're causing a scene. They might fear that the violence would turn against them or they'll experience retaliation. And so those are a few examples of personal barriers that can make it difficult for somebody to feel like they can just step in to one of these situations.
Those are super relatable to me. Like, I hate confrontation.
Yeah.
And so it's always, I'm like, oh, what if I'm reading this room wrong and I like try to jump in and then they're mad at me and they don't like me.
Yeah, absolutely.
It can be tough. We also hear a lot of students having like relationship or social barriers. So,
Mm-hmm.
maybe feeling like their friends will give them a hard time if they do anything, or they're like, that's not my business. Like, let's just leave people to kind of deal with their own issues. Like, I don't want to get involved in their business.
Mm-hmm. And it can be awkward if it's with a bystander, we can focus either on the person being harmed or the person causing the harm. And I think going along with that relationship barrier, sometimes it can be really hard for people to step in when it's maybe their friend that's doing the harm. And that can be really difficult too.
Yeah, for sure. People are generally very hesitant to want to do anything that's going to like compromise their relationship with their friend, which is super valid and like
Mm-hmm.
super normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And then last one is general barriers. So maybe we don't know what's going on. Some behaviors that we look at can be either common or concerning behaviors, and it can be hard to tell the difference. So if someone doesn't know what they're looking at, then that can play into reason why they might not step in. Maybe there's other people around, they feel like, oh, those people are more equipped than I am, or those people will probably act and I don't need to. Or if nobody's acting, then it can kind of be like, oh, maybe it's not that big of a deal because nobody else is like reacting the way that I feel inside right now. Or maybe they don't want to feel like they're going to make things worse. So all these different examples are like perfectly, like you said, perfectly valid reasons why we wouldn't step in.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not just limited to these things, but they can be multiple types of barriers that prevent someone to be an active bystander. But the great thing about our trainings is that we can give people tools to step in despite their barriers. So that's like the best piece of the whole like puzzle.
Yeah, I think I like it because we're not telling people to like, oh, well, just ignore your barriers. Who cares about your relationship with your friends? Or who cares that you don't want to make things worse? It's so much more like, we acknowledge that you have these feelings and those are valid. What can we do despite all of that? Like, what can we still do,
Mm-hmm. I think that's perfectly well said.
So, with our training, we do have a couple of kind of specific pieces and categories of ways that tips or tools that we can give to students. And specifically with the green dot training, they call that the 3Ds, methods that students can use or people in general can use to kind of get involved.
Yeah, so 3Ds, like you said, are just different ways that people can intervene. So there's direct, delegate, and distract. So if someone decides to directly get involved, then that would be directly interacting with either the person being harmed or the person causing the harm and approaching the situation that way. So the story from Missoula is a perfect example of, the guy saw someone trying really hard to get this girl. She looked uncomfortable, so he directly got involved and pretended with the person being harmed and pretended to be friends, and then that was that. So that's one example.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Swedish student involved with Chanel Miller's case.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a perfect example of directly intervening.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of the one that our minds often go to first when we think of bystander intervention, right? Like just getting directly involved, like saying, hey, cut that out, or connecting with that person who's maybe potentially being harmed and saying like, hey, do you need help, or hey, friend, or whatever. People can also delegate too, and kind of, if they don't feel safe or they don't feel comfortable, or for whatever reason they don't feel like they can directly get involved in some way, it's perfectly valid to get someone else who's maybe more qualified, right? Like a security guard, or, we work a lot with students at school. So maybe it's a teacher or school counselor or an RA if they're in college. Or even like go up to someone else. Do you know that person? Like, is that your friend? Can you take care of them? But just getting someone else who might be more qualified or in a better place to take charge in that situation if we don't feel comfortable doing it ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one is my personal favorite. And it works great for anybody, especially if you feel like you identify or resonate with those like personal or general barriers, is distract. So causing some sort of diversion or distraction to keep the behavior from continuing or escalating. So I have a lot of examples for this one. It's my favorite, but I mean, it's really simple as like asking to like borrow somebody's phone, like, oh, my phone died, can I borrow yours? Or spilling a drink. Or I always joke that like sometimes groups of females who go out together are great at causing distractions because all it takes is one girl in that group of friends to be like, I have to use the bathroom. And then just rounding up the rest of your friends and like all going to the bathroom together. This is simple distraction. Another easy one is like, oh, well, you're like so and so, somebody's car is getting towed, like, or like if you're at like some house party, like, oh, the police are coming. Super easy ways to like completely diffuse and divert a whole situation.
Mm-hmm. I think that one's especially useful if like maybe we have concerns that like if we jump in directly, like maybe we're concerned it'll make things worse or like something will escalate. Super quickly diffuse things or just change the subject or, distract in some way. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just some kind of leftover tips and tools and, a lot of us listening are maybe community members or people who just want to kind of help make our communities safer as a group. What are some tips that we can kind of leave with people?
Yeah, so I think taking a second look and checking in are a couple of really simple ones. We don't know like what's going on, not like maybe listening through the lens of a bystander and not being afraid to take a second look or check in. That can be really easy. Just reassessing a situation or checking in is a simple way. And if you're like, hey, is everything all right? The worst that's going to happen is someone's like, oh, yeah, everything's fine. But at least they're opening that door for a conversation potentially later down the road. So those things never hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also, especially in situations where maybe we have some relationship or connection with the person who's causing the harmful behaviors or experiencing them, I think it's important for us to be able to kind of focus on the behavior itself.
Mm-hmm.
Less focusing on the person doing the behaviors, but we're focused on that specific behavior. And I think that can kind of be a helpful lens to look through, especially if we do have some type of relationship maybe with the person causing that harmful behavior, focusing on that behavior and saying like, well, is this an acceptable behavior or not, regardless of the person actually doing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about what if it was someone that you loved? What if it was someone that you cared about, like your friend or your sibling or your partner?
Mm-hmm.
How would that potentially affect or change the situation? And thinking through that situation in that way as well.
Yeah, because even if the person experiencing those things is like a stranger or someone we don't know super well, they still have every bit as much right to safety and to not feeling uncomfortable as someone that we love very much. So I think that's a really important way to frame it in our own minds to help us feel a little bit more motivated to be like, okay, I would step in if it was someone I loved, so I can step in for someone I don't know as well too.
Yeah, I love that.
I think the other thing that's always very important is we don't want everyone just like super jazzed and ready to like go step in and then put their own safety at risk.
Yeah.
If we're concerned that like things are going to escalate into much more severe violence, if there are like weapons involved, anything that's going to put us in harm's way, maybe then we don't want to jump directly in and we want to maybe find someone who's a little bit more qualified to deal with something that where maybe the danger is more high. So I think that's an important little caveat to make is like, we don't want everyone to just jump into really dangerous situations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like the example I use, especially in the schools. I'm like, okay, if people are like throwing hands, don't just jump in the middle of like the situation.
Yeah.
We want everybody to be safe, including the active bystander.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah, and just being someone like leading by example and being someone who doesn't tolerate violence or harmful behavior, comments, jokes, etc. Like holding people accountable and not like engaging in those types of harmful behaviors ourselves can also be really helpful. And it can be hard. So it's just a lot of practice, and that's kind of why we spend so many hours in training. And sometimes people go through our trainings multiple times, is because all of this takes like practice and no one's going to be perfect right away. But like if you just kind of like go out to public and people watch or whatever, like I'm sure you'll spot some sort of off situation, and like, practicing like those things within our friend groups or families is a really great way to end to build up that confidence and those tools
Mhm.
when it comes to the bystander.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important part of that, kind of as we were talking earlier about being a proactive bystander, is just the people in our lives knowing that like we don't put up with these really harmful behaviors. Like we don't put up with those kinds of comments, and really just creating a space around us that is a place that's safe, and we're a person who's safe, and we are someone who's not going to put up with violence of any kind. I think is a really important piece to kind of changing those sort of social norms and being a very proactive bystander.
Yeah, absolutely. Another little tool that we can use is if someone discloses something to us after the fact, there are still things like we can do in that situation. And it really kind of starts with believing them and listening without judgment.
Yeah, comments like, "Oh, I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's not your fault." Just sitting there with them and letting them tell their story can be really, really important. And just
Mm-hmm.
validating that whole story.
Yeah, absolutely. And helping them, like asking them if they want to get connected with any resources and helping them find those resources, asking how you can support them. And if anybody needs those resources, like Safe Passage, we're more than happy to help someone like get connected to those resources in our community.
And depending on the situation, depending on the person, they may need completely different resources, or they might just need some time to process. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
being there to support them, whatever they choose and whatever they need, is really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Well, that's our bystander education. If people are interested in learning more or having a longer, sort of more in depth session on this, what can we do for them?
Well, we have a super great community partnership with Coeur d'Alene High School, which I'll let you talk about, and North Idaho College. So if anyone is faculty, staff, or student of North Idaho College, they can absolutely either reach out to like the student services or myself, and I can get them connected to the person in charge of Green Dot. In that way, we can kind of get people roped into the next Green Dot training, whatever that looks like at this point. We will have them here to get people connected on campus to the next training.
hmm Yeah, and kind of similar at Coeur d'Alene High School, we do trainings for students, and staff too, if they're interested, are more than welcome to participate. And we don't really know what this school year is going to look like yet. But if someone is a student at the high school at Coeur d'Alene, they can more than welcome to reach out to us, and we can make sure that whatever Green Dot training looks like in the next year, we find a way to help them participate.
Yeah, and if anyone is part of our community, so maybe not a part of North Idaho College or Coeur d'Alene High School, but is still interested in Green Dot, we can bring Green Dot to people, like their businesses or their
Mhm.
organizations. We can do like brief hour-long overview training, get people those tools, or we can do the full-blown 4 or 5 hour training. A lot of people prefer the 1 hour overview, which is fine. And we can make that work. I know, I'm like, you don't want to hear me talk at you for 5 hours? What?
Yeah. That community overview we can also do in other high schools as well.
Yeah.
So that's an option for all schools in the 5 northern counties, middle schools and high schools.
Yes, exactly. Sandpoint High School has been super generous in allowing us to do a 1 hour overview curriculum with them. So we can definitely bring that to any school, organization, business, agency, whatever that looks like. We're very adaptable and we can incorporate it however fits them best.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very flexible and we love creating new partnerships and getting connected with new community members and new agencies. So anyone who's interested in more information or anything like that, we're so excited. We love it.
Super pumped. We're very and a lot of people, we have shirts at the end of the trainings. If you need more of an incentive for us to hang out with you, we will bring shirts and snacks. So
yeah, I mean, I'll go to free events for t-shirts and snacks any day. So. And as always, we provide support, help for anyone affected by domestic violence, sexual assault, teen dating violence, stalking, all those types of things as well.
What have you been doing for self-care this month?
I've been outside a lot in the sun, in the water. Still kayaking sometimes.
Yeah.
I also have some floaties now, so when I'm feeling too lazy to kayak, I just put the floaties in the water.
Or you just like put the floaty and connect it to the kayak and have someone else paddle.
Yeah, that's what I need to do. The problem with floaties is like I'll put them in the water, but then I float or like there's like a small current or there's like a wind and I have to like constantly be paddling. So I just need to like attach it to someone's kayak and then they can paddle me.
That's what I'm thinking.
How about you, Kaila?
I've been doing hiking with little furball Elvis.
Aww.
That's been awesome. Still getting outside, getting fresh air, and climbing mountains and doing all the fun things that we would normally do, but much earlier in the morning as it gets hotter.
Before it gets too hot.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like 90-something degrees today.
Yeah, it's hot. Like I go outside and I instantly like start sweating. I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know. I love it.
I'm glad that Coeur d'Alene is surrounded by lakes.
Yeah.
So when I'm feeling too lazy to hike, I can just go to the lake and make him swim for a little bit, and then he gets his exercise, and then we take naps.
That's the best. I love it. This is a good place to live in the summer.
Oh my gosh, yes it is. I mean, I'm biased now, and I think Coeur d'Alene is a great place to live year round, but especially in the summer, and I'm sure a lot of other people would agree.
I can't imagine disagreeing with that.
No. And if anyone disagrees, just Google pictures of Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening. If you have specific topics or things that you want us to talk about, please let us know. You can always reach out to us via email, through our website, safepassageid.org. You can call our hotline. You can message us on Instagram at safepassageteen. Lots of ways to get a hold of us. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, concerns, anything else. We're more than happy to hear from you.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivia, for having me again.
Of course. Thanks so much for coming back on. Like I said, this is all part of my plot to get you on all the time.
I love it. It's my favorite. Anytime I hang out with you is my favorite. So I'm in.
Yeah. Absolutely. Hear your voice through the computer.
Yeah. I'm still here.
All right. Well, in the meantime, stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy, stay well, and wash your hands. Amanda always says that, but she's not here today.
Dang it. This is why we need her back.
I know.